And now I want to transition to the final topic of the day, a kind of fun, kind of off topic subject, and that is, of course, the UFC. Because for just about 19 years of my life, I had not watched a UFC event live. That changed this past weekend. It was Volkanovski, it was Lopez, it was UFC 325, it was on Paramount Plus, and I watched it. It was my first time. I was intrigued. I was compelled, and compelled enough to obviously construct a whole segment to talk about on this show. UFC 325 through the eyes of a first-time viewer. That's kind of where I am at. Again, I hadn't watched a UFC event for my entire life until this moment. I had gone through phases where you watch enough social media edits of Conor McGregor, Leon Edwards, guys like that. There's obviously some level of intrigue, but the real barrier, apart from not really growing up in a very combat sports friendly space, it's not something I grew up around. It's not something I was exposed to. It's not something that was kind of like ingratiated into my perspective of what sports are and what the sports world is. Combat sports were kind of not involved in that, and still, it's probably not really my thing. I prefer basketball. I prefer football. I prefer many of those other, mainstream team sports, I suppose you could say. But nonetheless, I started watching college wrestling because I have been broadcasting college wrestling for Big Ten Plus this year, here at Indiana University. And so kind of having a background in wrestling, that paired with the fact that obviously the UFC is no longer on pay-per-view, it's now on Paramount Plus, made it much more accessible and much more appealing to me, I suppose you could say, now that I had a way to watch it. And when I was watching it, I kind of understood a little bit better what was going on just because of that wrestling background that is sort of established over the course of the last few months. And so UFC 325, I thought I'd give it a shot. There are definitely probably millions of people that decided to give UFC a shot after its move to Paramount Plus. Again, it's a little bit more accessible now. It was Alexander Volkanovski defending his featherweight championship against Diego Lopez. This is the second time that title fight has occurred between these two fighters, and Volkanovski wins once again, this time in Sydney, Australia. So some first impressions, right? Because again, I come in with an understanding of how the UFC works, right? I understand the belt system. I understand the rankings. I understand the weight classes. I understand kind of the landscape of what it is. I just hadn't watched it live quite yet. I was watching with a couple friends, one of which was completely new to the sport, had no idea what was going on, in a good way, kind of discovering. And then, a couple other people that have kind of had some experience. They watch it quite a bit, are very aware of the sport and kind of what it contains. So first impressions from an experience perspective, that's kind of the context on what I'm coming into this through. Then you have first impressions of the experience. I want to talk about some of the fights, especially Volkanovski and Lopez, of course, primarily. The walkout songs were very fun, and that certainly got me excited. Obviously, I don't know exactly what song Diego Lopez walked out to, but certainly, sparked some excitement. And then obviously in his home country, in Sydney, Australia, you have Alexander Volkanovski walking out to Down Under by Men at Work. A ton of fun. I've listened to that song like probably 10 times. It's got to be, if they did a Spotify Wrapped for just 1 week, that song would be in my number one song this week since this fight occurred for sure, because just such an exciting moment. The crowd is into it. The crowd surely was incredibly loud in that arena as he's walking out, as they're celebrating sort of their hometown hero, I suppose you could say, in Volkanovski. And that's obviously just backed up and supported by the fact that he goes out and wins and defends his title at 37 years old. Again, combat sports, not really my forte, not really. I don't know how much more I'm going to invest from a time and energy perspective into this sport. I struggle with combat sports sometimes. It'll sound weird, but the picture perfect best case scenario fight for me is kind of exactly what happens when Volkanovski and Lopez, where there's a ton of respect between the two. They love each other. They're, handshakes, hugs, all of that. And it's a fight that goes 5 rounds and no one really gets hurt. Because I like the chess match aspect of it. I like the mental aspect of it. I like the technique aspect of it. And obviously the grandeur aspect of it with just the fact that, the walkout songs and the crowds and all of that. Just there's so much hype built around a given title fight because of how few they are. And I prefer kind of the chess match aspect. I don't like the violence, I suppose you could say, is what I'm trying to get at. I struggle with that, which is probably going to very quickly eliminate my interest in this sport. But again, I tried it out and I felt compelled to talk about it on the podcast. That's exactly what we're going to do. Kind of paired with that idea that the point that I just made, and the fact that, of course, I have a wrestling background with the NCAA and the Big Ten. I like the wrestling the most, and so what stuck out the most to me between Volkanovski and Lopez was the fact that Lopez's takedown defense seemed to be pretty good. Volkanovski went for multiple takedown attempts. Obviously, Lopez was able to avoid them time and time again. Obviously lost the fight in other ways, but that was something that just stuck out to me. Lopez's his ability to stay on his feet, I was very impressed by against Volkanovski. The mutual respect between these two was awesome. They're obviously both amazing. They're obviously both great at what they do. Volkanovski has won both times, but Lopez has in many ways made it close both times, and so I found that interesting, and I just love the mutual respect in between rounds, after the fight, across the board. Just the two of them clearly great at what they do at the very top of their craft, and appreciate that fact about one another, which I, again, just very much appreciated and found very compelling and very enjoyable. Volkanovski and Lopez, the actual fight itself at the end of the night. I'm a big fan of both of these guys now. I'm mainly a fan of Volkanovski. Again, Lopez's takedown defense was awesome. I like Volkanovski because he's on the older side. He's kind of a fan favorite. It would be cool to see him never lose again in the UFC. It'd be cool to see him retire whenever he wants to retire, but continue to win until that happens. I would appreciate that the most right now in the UFC. I would hate to see Volkanovski lose. I would hate to see Lopez lose as well, but obviously between these two, somebody has to lose. Lopez, great energy. Again, between both these guys, great energy, great aura, great presence. Just they both clearly enjoy being there. They both clearly enjoy performing, again, at the very highest level in mixed martial arts across the board. So Lopez seems to be an awesome guy, and I really appreciated watching him. Volkanovski seems to be an awesome guy as well. Very inspirational. I watched his 30-minute, reflection video on YouTube where after he was home, he had his belts and he was kind of, just reflecting on the experience of UFC 325 as the person in the octagon that did indeed emerge victorious. I had no idea who was winning until we got to round 5. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think a lot of people that know a lot about this sport obviously also agreed that they had no idea who was winning, especially after the first 2 rounds or so. Just absolutely no idea. Obviously, I'm not a judge. Obviously, I've never watched the sport live before, but you kind of can tell with a sport like this who has the upper hand many times. And in this case, could not tell at all whatsoever, which fighter was potentially going to emerge victorious, which made this very exciting and interesting. Obviously, Volkanovski pretty much sealed it in the 5th round, establishing his dominance, establishing his advantage. But again, Lopez, some good takedown defense. Both guys were getting some great shots in. Both guys were having some great moments. Volkanovski just so good and so methodical and just so fascinating to watch. His fight IQ is unbelievable, and just to watch him work and to watch him do what he does and watch him methodically work at Lopez until he had scored, for lack of a better term, scored enough points to win, right? Put enough of a difference between himself and Lopez, and then obviously putting an exclamation point on it in the 5th round. That was an incredibly fascinating, compelling process to watch, and across the board, just a good time. Great respect between the two of them. It went 5 rounds. It was very even. That's the type of fight that I would want, and so I appreciated, obviously, witnessing that take place at UFC 325 at the very end of the night. The walkout songs were awesome, and it was just a great way. It was just a great way for Volkanovski to defend his title. It was done right in Sydney. He wins a very, 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 very great battle against Lopez, someone who, again, the two have great respect for one another. It was Volkanovski's home crowd, great walkout song. Good experience. At the end of the day, that was good, and that was a nice way for it to begin and end in Sydney between those two fighters. The rest of the card, there were some other fights that obviously I have some fascinating thoughts about. There were some things that stuck out to me. I'll go from I suppose biggest fight to least big fight. Right, you've got the co-main event between St. Denis and Hooker. I believe that was or St. Denis rather, and Hooker. I need to figure out how to pronounce his name, but the two of them. That was a fascinating one. It's a technical knockout in round 2. It's St. Denis with a dominant victory once again. I kind of like him a lot. I was watching the day of. I was watching the UFC fight marathon on YouTube, that live stream, just to kind of get a feel for some of the guys that were going to obviously be stepping into the octagon. In St. Denis, I watched the fight against somebody where he, knocked the guy out like 16 seconds. So he seems to be an up and coming really prodigy maybe in the lightweight division. The lightweight division is clearly very deep. I've learned that very quickly, and we'll talk a little bit more about some more lightweights a little bit later on as well. But St. Denis might be the next guy. I think he's number 5 now. He moved from number 8 to number 5. He's a spot above Paddy Pimblett right now. I wonder who's next for him. Maybe it's Paddy Pimblett. in his win streak, his 4-fight, something like that win streak, St. Denis, his win streak, he's been fighting like once every 2 months. So kind of quick turnarounds for him. We'll see if that slows down as he climbs up the rankings, but he seems to be kind of the next guy at lightweight. We'll see what happens once, we're going to get to a point eventually where someone's going to have to obviously take the title from Topuria or Gaethje or whatever happens, whether Topuria gets stripped and Gaethje gets bumped up or the two fight for the main title. I have no idea, but St. Denis in the mix, and he's clearly in the mix to really knock off some big names, and I think he proved that with how dominant his win over Hooker was this past weekend. You then have, a little bit before that, at heavyweight, you have Taliesin Teixeira and Tai Tuivasa. I apologize for pronouncing either one of those names wrong. Both were just exhausted by the end of round 3. Teixeira was taking some hits towards the end, and I thought, if this is a situation where someone's going to have to knock out the other, maybe Tuivasa's the guy to do that. Tuivasa has been on a, I believe, 5-fight losing streak. That's now has dropped to a 6-fight losing streak. Teixeira won by unanimous decision. By the end of this one, he was, I believe, on top and in control for the majority of the first round, if I'm remembering correctly. But nonetheless, that's 6 straight losses for Tuivasa. The takeaway, they just were both exhausted, and it was going to be Teixeira the whole way, unless Tuivasa was going to be able to put together a knockout by the end of it. He was not quite able to do so, and the fight ended the way the fight ended. I don't know the way to pronounce this guy's name, but Quillan Salkild at lightweight, I believe unranked, I believe very early in his UFC career, won via submission in round 1 over Jamie Malarkey. And Salkild, very good wrestler, which I appreciate because, again, I'm more of a wrestling guy, more of a grappling guy than a striking guy, I suppose, in the UFC. Just more proof that the lightweight division is unbelievably deep. I have no idea who could possibly, the lightweight division is going to be ridiculous. If there's any lightweight fight in any fight card on any main event, it's clearly going to be a movie. And Salkild's going to work his way up there. St. Denis is already working his way up there. You obviously got Pimblett that's still trying to win a title. You got Gaethje and Topuria. Topuria, arguably the best in the world maybe right now. Obviously Makhachev is the pound-for-pound best, but Topuria is amazing. So until some of these guys retire or switch weight classes, it's going to be very hard to break through. But there's so many contenders that could break through at lightweight that it's making that division incredibly fascinating to watch play out, and we'll see more of that sort of throughout the next few weeks and months as we get through the next few fight nights and obviously numbered events, Max Holloway and Charles Oliveira coming up. But Salkild is awesome. Again, great wrestler, and he wins very, very swiftly against Malarkey in very impressive fashion. So I'm interested to see how his career plays out and how his career develops the rest of the way. Nonetheless, across the board, a new experience for me, an interesting experience for me. We'll see if I watch again. I probably won't take the time to watch every fight night every week. We'll see what happens the next numbered event, how I feel, whether or not I'm interested in Oliveira and Holloway. But either way, that'll be UFC 326. That was UFC 325. Alexander Volkanovski is still the champion at the featherweight division, and we'll see how many more fights he has left in him. He seems like he's ready to take on the next guy, and we'll see who that ends up being at featherweight at some point, potentially later this year. But nonetheless, that's what I have to say about the UFC.